Welcome to the Welcome Course, Session 4. And today we've come to the topic of evil. In the baptismal covenant, we're at this particular phrase: will you persevere in resisting evil, and whenever you fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord? Now, this, if you're feeling a little kind of discomforted by this, then that's not a surprise. In fact, you probably should feel a little bit uneasy when the topic of conversation comes around to evil. This is heavy stuff. So I want you to just think for a moment, not about the images that come into your mind or the words that you are thinking, but how this actually makes you feel. Sometimes, those of us who are more at home with words, instantly start to think about words, and those who are more at home with feelings, may have a kind of a gut reaction to a concept or a word. So that's where I want you to operate for a couple of minutes and just get in touch with what this concept of evil, how that makes you feel, as well as what it makes you think. So here are some things that I clipped from media sources about evil, how that word is used in today's society. And see what you think of these. The bureaucracy of evil, how Islamic State ran a city. Church's head of security says he killed an evil, not a human, in taking down gunmen. Google's top managers now want to be evil. Can workers stop them? Russia, the evil empire again. Evil sexual predator jailed for life for 136 rapes. Pope Francis condemns spread of fake news as evil. And just how evil can the Yankees get? So there's a range of headlines from media sources, and it kind of presents a very confusing picture of what evil is, according to our headline writers and media compilers and bloggers. So what is this concept that we are trying to grapple with tonight? When it comes to evil, how do you understand that? Some of it is from these headlines is really very terrifying. Terrorism, attacks against people of a very severe nature, causing harm that we can't really get our heads around. And some of it just seems to be kind of flippant, like, the Yankees getting evil. Well, what does that actually mean? And can that be used in the same way that we've used the word in some of those other headlines? So here are some dictionary definitions of evil. Webster's says it is the fact of suffering, misfortune, and wrongdoing. Interesting. The Oxford English Dictionary says profound immorality and wickedness, especially when regarded as a supernatural force. Now, that's quite a different definition from Webster's there. Webster's is more kind of like, the stuff that just kind of happens from day to day. It might not be the result of malevolent forces or wicked kind of motives. It's just like the stuff of life, suffering and misfortune. The OED gives this more classical, supernatural definition, and suddenly we're in a world of polarity, of dualism, where there is good and there is evil. There are forces of goodness and malevolent forces. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word that is translated evil simply means trouble, distress, or punishment. So more in line, really, with the Webster's kind of common or garden kind of experience. In the New Testament, though, the Greek word that is translated evil carries this moral element to it. So, acts of wrong that are done to other people. There are two classic words for a devil in biblical literature. One is Satan, and the literal translation of Satan into English is opposer. So somebody who, or something that opposes goodness. It is opposed to God. It is contrary to the ways of God and indeed the followers of God. And devil, which literally means accuser. Now that's a really interesting idea, I think. And it comes from the Old Testament book of Job, where there's this extraordinary scene at the beginning of the book where God is in heaven and sort of supernatural beings are presenting themselves and engaged in conversation with God. And the devil comes along and accuses Job and says, if you treat Job harshly, he'll give up on his faith. He'll stop believing you. He'll curse you and die. So can I have permission, God, to afflict him with misfortunes and sufferings of various kinds? And in the New Testament, the devil in the book of Revelation has the task of accusing the brethren, the Christians who are experiencing persecution. Now, here are some visual images of devil or Satan that we've become familiar with in our various history and cultures. See what you make of these. Now, some of those are terrifying, big teeth, red, scary faces. The intention of the artist is to frighten the person looking at the image. And for that artist, that is what the devil is. Something scary, something that threatens us, something that's going to, if it could devour us, such as that image on the right of the screen in the middle. Some see the devil as a figure of fun, like the little imp there in the middle of the screen with the tripod, the trident. Some see him as quite a different figure entirely. This is where I think we get really kind of interesting. Top left and bottom right, he is the devil, and also bottom left as well in that sculpture. Here is the devil as an attractive being. Someone or something that is going to not get its way with you by force, by fear, by a big display of evil, but something that's going to influence you in a more subtle way, in a kind of like seductive kind of way. So there's the very handsome man in the bottom right picture and the top right picture as well. In the top left, there's an interesting picture. I don't know whether you can see it very well, but I hope you can. It's of Jesus in the wilderness where he went for 40 days to fast and encountered strong temptation. And there's the devil in a human form, but with wings. And again, that's not a particularly frightening image. If you can look at his face there, it's kind of attractive and seductive. And that seems to be a very strong element in how we in modern Western culture have come to understand the existence and character of a devil or Satan. Not so much, the horror movie kind of Satan, but the seductive Satan. And it stands to reason when you think about it, the devil, needs to be pretty seductive in order to convince us to do things which are against the will of God. If it was all about, sacrificing goats and being, terrible to other people, then that's not really going to win over too many people in terms of being tempted. Something that's more seductive and, points out the benefits of a particular course of action, well, that's much more likely to influence people. And I think that's what these artists, or some of these artists, have tried to capture as they have presented, the figure of Satan or devil. So, putting all this together, I wonder if we can move towards some kind of understanding of what this is. And first of all, what I want to say is that I believe that evil is real, and that it finds its origin in a force or personality. I think it is very, very difficult for anyone to look at the world in all its suffering and all its incomprehensible badness at times, and not conclude that there is a real thing called evil, which undermines humanity, which opposes goodness, and which has influence on the affairs of human beings. So there's a kind of a question of, well, so what actually is evil, and what is kind of normal kind of acts of selfishness, things we might term sin. And the way I understand it is that evil is kind of restricted, or should be restricted, for those phenomena which go beyond our ability to understand in their magnitude or in their complete senseless, motiveless depravity. So I can understand common or garden everyday sin, like the 7 deadly sins, sloth, greed, avarice, envy, lust. I forget what the other 2 are, but I can understand those. They're things that I feel tempted to commit as well. It's kind of like we've all experienced the temptation to commit, regular common or garden sins. But then there is this level of evil which goes beyond our ability to understand. And I'm thinking now of things like genocide, the eradication of people because of some racial or religious feature that they share. The desire to just wipe out human beings, something that is profoundly anti-human as well as anti-God. Then I think we're beginning to talk about evil. So, I don't know if I'm right in this kind of thinking, what I'm saying here, but that might be a helpful way, to construct this worldview that I'm describing. That the sin, which we can perhaps all get our heads around because we're all, prone to it. And then there's this other thing which takes on a life of its own and gets so out of hand that you can actually see that there is an intelligence, a personality behind it that is just so antithetical to all that is good and right and human and divine, that it requires the belief in just something that's supernaturally overwhelming. And I think a lot of people, even people who would not claim to be religious or devout Christians, would possibly agree with that view of the world. So that's evil. The promise at the beginning makes a distinction between evil and sin. So what now is sin? Let's move on to that concept. Now, sin in the New Testament is not a religious word, or at least it didn't begin as a religious word. When St. Paul was trying to find a word to describe the activity of human beings that separates them from God, he used an archery term. And the archery term, sin, means to miss the mark. So the archer will aim at the target, will fire the arrow, and it will miss. It will fall short of the target. So it's not something that they plan to do that is evil. You know, they're trying to hit the target, but they fall short of it. And this is the concept that Paul draws into Christian theology and says, okay, this is what it means to sin. It is to aim at something, to aim and miss the mark, to be fatally flawed so that what you do cannot match up to the standard that we are aiming at. So all sin, this, what I'm about to say, you know, may be a concept you've never come across before, but I think there's some real value in it. You might think it's a bit unconventional, but, you know, try it on and see what you think. Sin is aiming high, but being a flawed human being. We try to find God in all the wrong places. Ever since our ancestors, and I'm talking now metaphorically, not historically, our ancestors in Eden, Adam and Eve, since their fall from relationship with God, there has been this human hunger to get back to the state of innocence. We are about the pursuit of heaven, or the return to Eden, or whatever you want to call it. There is this human longing for reconnection once again with the transcendent, with the pure and the holy, with the Creator who made us have a relationship. So that's what we're born with, and we go about pursuing it in any number of different ways. Some of them are helpful, and some of them are not helpful. The not helpful ones is, trying to find God in all the wrong places. And one of the main ways we do that is through our egos, through placing ourselves in positions where we have pleasant circumstances, and we think that will come about with money or possessions or physical pleasure, or any number of things which, in and of themselves are not harmful, but do not actually get us back to God, because you cannot overcome the ego with the ego. There has to be something external that's going to get us back to God. So we are steeped as human beings in missing the mark. We have a hunger for heaven. We're trying to return to Eden. We're looking for God in all the wrong places. Now, if I'm right about this, it puts a kind of a positive spin on the whole concept of sin, doesn't it? Sin is not like a conscious desire, I am going to rebel against God. I am going to do something that is going to be damaging to myself and that's going to cause a rift between God and me and perhaps cause harm to other people. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to reach the perfect. I'm trying to reach the ideal, to get back to Eden, to get into relationship with God. So if you think about any sin, and I challenge you to do that right now, think of a particular sin, and if you try hard enough, you may be able to see that at its basest level, it's a cry for wholeness. It's maybe a pursuit of beauty. Maybe it's a longing for intimacy and completion and contentment and satisfaction. Heaven, in other words, or God, in other words. So all of those things that you're tempted to do, that I'm tempted to do, that actually, don't actually succeed in getting us back to God, those are desires, natural desires, to get back to Eden, but we're just trying to do it in the wrong way. Like eating too much, or by becoming jealous of someone else's stuff. By stealing, by violence. When you think that something is being threatened. So have a go at that exercise. You might find I'm right. You might find that I'm wrong. So let's talk about this in a bit more detail. You've heard of the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament. There are actually a whole library full of laws in the Old Testament, usually in the first 5 books, particularly the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and a bit of Exodus as well. But that's where you'll find most of the Old Testament laws. Now, there are, in the Old Testament, 365 thou shalt nots. Okay, 365 don't do this. That's like one for every day of the year. And there are 248 thou shalts. You will do this. One for every bone in the human body. Okay, this is a bit fanciful, I admit, but add them up. We have 613 laws that cover all of us all the time. I like that. So, what's the solution to us missing the mark? Because however hard you try, you're going to fall down on one of these 613 at some point in your life. We all have. Many of us fall down on many of them every day. I'm sure that I do. So how do we get out of this? If God instructed people of old, this is how you are to live, and we simply can't do it, then what's the solution? What's the answer? Well, the answer is the good news, and that's what the word gospel means. Remember last week or the week before, we were talking about this concept of the atonement, the at-one-ment, being put right with God. Now, the atonement, the at-one-ment, means that we are put right with God, and that means that we don't have to actually fulfill those 613 laws. You can try, but A, you're not going to succeed, and B, you're not going to be very happy about it either, because if you go around all the time thinking about 613 things that I must do or must not do, that's going to be an unbearable weight for you on your conscience and upon every moment of every day of self-examination, and that's a life of drudgery, not a life of spontaneity and joy, which is the life that God has created us for. So St. Paul, in particular, develops this concept. He says that what puts us right is not obeying 613 laws, it's faith in God, which means nobody can boast. Nobody can say, well, I'm holier than those people over there, so I'm going to get to God, and they're not. There's no room for that. We've all fallen short of God's standard. We've all missed the mark. And we all are in need equally of being rescued from outside, because our egos cannot save our own egos. And the classic piece of teaching from Jesus on this is the parable of the prodigal son. There's the reference, Luke chapter 15, 11 to 24. You can stop the video now and read it, or you can go to a Bible and read it for yourself. But I'm going to carry on. I'm not going to read it. You can do that when the video is stopped. So, coming to God is then a turning around. Paul says that we're put right by faith. So we kind of make this decision that, yep, I'm going to believe, and yep, I'm going to turn around from that and just go the way of God. And yes, I'm going to continue to mess up. I'm going to continue with the 613 sins. You know, I might get through 200 or 300 of them today. But that doesn't alter the fact that I am right with God, that I am forgiven, that I will be forgiven already for what I'm going to do. I'm already forgiven for the future sins that I'm going to commit. And nothing is going to stop that. There is nothing you can do to stop God from loving you. There is nothing you can do to stop God from forgiving you. He's going to do it. And there's nothing you can do about it. And that is why it's called good news, because that lifts from us the burden of having to slavishly follow rules in order to impress God. There is actually, of course, two laws which Jesus mentions that we are bound to. Love God with all you've got and love your neighbor as yourself. Just two. But coincidentally, if we fulfill those two laws, we will be fulfilling all of the 10 Commandments and everything else. But our motive will be love, not duty. And that's a very good thing. So, tonight we're going to look at another piece of what it means to be Episcopalian. And you'll remember that last week or the week before, we left off the story of the Episcopal Church with the Church of England through the British Empire coming to the 13 colonies. Now, they continued to be members of the Church of England in those 13 colonies, and everywhere where the British Empire went, so the Church of England went. So all over what was the British Empire, throughout Africa, India, Oceania, North America, Central America, Asia, everywhere where the Brits went, they took their church with them. And as each church in each of those territories became independent, then they could no longer be part of the Church of England, because, say 13 colonies, the Church of England, can't be the Church of England anymore in 13 states the way it was in 13 colonies, because the sovereign can no longer be the head of the church. The sovereign has no authority in those 13 new states. So what happened is the members of the Church of England who had been in the 13 colonies and now are living in the 13 states continue with their faith. They can continue to worship in the same way, believe the same things, have the same priests, the same bishops, the same everything, the same prayer book, but they can't be Church of England anymore. They have to be something else. So they become the Episcopal Church in those 13 states, in close union with the Church of England and the Church of Scotland and the Church of Wales and the Church of Ireland, but kind of independent as well. And thus begins what's called the Anglican Communion. Anglican meaning, English. And gradually, as all of the British Empire became independent over the next couple of hundred years, so these churches became semi-autonomous, but continued to live in close relationship with the Church of England. So on the screen right now, those green areas are all the places where the Anglican Communion is today represented. And you'll see it's most of the world. And we are bound with these other churches by what's called bonds of affection. Here's some of the membership of the worldwide Anglican Communion. There you see North America, about 3 million people. Southern America is much smaller, less than 1 million. Africa and the Middle East, 38 million. Huge number of Anglicans in Africa. The UK, 26 million. It has to be said, though, that includes an awful lot of people who are nominally Church of England because they were baptized in the Church of England. That is not church attendance. Asia, 4 million. Oceania, about 4 or 5 million. So all around the world, wherever the British went, there is now this Anglican Communion. So, there are 89 million baptized Anglicans in 45 self-governing churches made up of 759 dioceses, 35,000 parishes, 70,000 individual congregations in 165 countries, which makes us the third largest Christian community in the world, after, obviously, the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox churches. We are led by, nominally at least, the Archbishop of Canterbury. There he is. His name is Justin Welby. He happens to be English, but he doesn't have to be. It could be that the next Archbishop of Canterbury is from some other country, and given, the rise of Africa as the place where the Anglican Church is growing the most, maybe next time the Archbishop of Canterbury will be from that continent. Could even be from America. So, we in the Episcopal Church are one of these 45 self-governing churches. Here we are. You'll see that we are divided into several different groupings geographically, and we are in that purple-red kind of grouping up there with New York and other dioceses. There are 100 dioceses in the Episcopal Church. Some of them are entire states, like Maine, you can see there, is just one state and one diocese. Some are in several different dioceses. So in New Jersey, there are 2 dioceses. There's the Diocese of Newark to the north of Elizabeth, and the Diocese of New Jersey, which is Elizabeth and south. So we're in that diocese. You see, some of them are rather strange shapes. Can you see this? There's a kind of a Pac-Man here. That's the Diocese of Navajo Land. Very interestingly, for some reason I don't know, but Native American peoples were particularly influenced by Episcopal missionaries. So a great many Native American people who are Christians that are Episcopal Christians, and there's a diocese there called Navajo Land. The leader of the Episcopal Church, the presiding bishop, is this man. His name is Michael Curry. He is a figurehead. He has no real authority, just in the same way the Archbishop of Canterbury has no real authority. They are not popes. The decision-making in the Episcopal Church is done, through lay and ordained representatives that go to councils and conventions and set, our local rules, if you like. But we are still bound together by the big unity that comes from the prayer book that we have in common with all the other 45 churches. Here in the Diocese of New Jersey, we have one bishop. There he is. His name is Chip Stokes, and he lives in Trenton, where our cathedral is located. In our diocese, there are 140 churches. Here at St. Paul's, we are the only Episcopal church in Westfield. We have 1,400 members here, and an average Sunday attendance of 225. That includes Saturday night as well. So there's our bit of domestic Episcopal stuff for today. Now the tricky question of the week. So why is there still evil? Why does evil exist? Well, firstly, because we live in a fallen world. You know, it's obvious just looking around the place. You know, we live in a world where there is sin and evil and suffering, and that is shot through the whole of creation. So nature is red in tooth and claw. Everything dies. Everything tends to chaos. Everything declines and decays. There is disunity, there's strife in the created order as well as just in the human realm. And one of the great Christian concepts for this is free will. The reason there is sin, according to classic Christian teaching, is because human beings were given the freedom to choose good and evil by God. Now you could say, well, that's kind of God's fault then. Why didn't God create human beings without free will? Why didn't he just kind of give us one option, like you will do the right thing always and every time? And what I want to say to that is, do you really want to live in a world where there is no free will? Think about it. Do you want to be programmed to put other people ahead of yourself? Do you want to have no choice in whether you get on with people? I don't think you do, actually, because I think that the true richness of being human can only be experienced because we have free will. God created us to have free will because he wanted a loving relationship with us. And you can't program a robot to love. You can program a robot to do certain things, like, be good, obey me, obey my instructions, but you cannot create a loving relationship with a robot or a computer, because love is a choice. I have to choose that I am going to put you first. And my feelings will alter in response to that choice. So love is a choice. You have to decide that I'm going to have that relationship with God and with other people. So does that mean that's it then? The dice is cast and we're kind of like just left now to live in this sinful place. Why doesn't God do something about it? And the classic Christian answer is that God has done something about it, as we saw a couple of weeks ago in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And the idea that through his death and resurrection and his sinless life, he has made our relationship with God secure. We have been reconciled to God through the death and resurrection of Christ. So why then has nothing apparently happened in response to that? Why do we still mess up? Why do we still, sin? Why is there still chaos? Well, the way I look at it as we live in the time in the Second World War between D-Day and the actual end of the war. Once the Allies had made a beachhead in northern France and secured it so that Allied forces could sail into the English Channel and come in the safety of the ports in Normandy and then spread down and south and east through Europe, it was only a matter of time before the Nazis were going to surrender. Once we had this limitless supply of largely American and Allied troops coming in through this funnel on D-Day, the end of the war was decided. It was D-Day, it was decision day, a decisive day, but it was still over a year until the war actually ended. And in that year, people still died. They were still sent to concentration camps. People still suffered immense suffering. But the result of the war was effectively won. And that's, I think, how it is now. The end of the world has been fixed, all right? The death and resurrection of Jesus has solved the problem. One day, there will be a final coming of Christ, an end of this sad old order of things, and the establishment of a new heaven and a new earth where there will be no more suffering and death, and where we will live with God. And that's going to happen, who knows when, but that's the hope of the Christian, that God has done something definitive, decisive, and now we're in this clearing up time, waiting for the final consummation of the kingdom of God. Doesn't look like it, looks like nothing has happened, but in the Christian faith, hope is that something has happened and it will end one day. So thank you for listening. It's been fun to present this with you. I'd be keen to know what you think. So if you watch this and you weren't at the meeting on Wednesday night, then email me, call me, have a chat after church. I'd love to talk. So God bless you, and thanks for watching.